student. On behalf of School of Gender and Development Studies, I welcome to you. As you know, that School of Gender and Development Studies is offering the Master's Program in Women's and Gender Studies, and in the specialization of the second year, we are offering the course called Gendered Nation. The code is MWG 006. We are under the revision of this course, and the new code will be 106. And soon the material will be also uploaded in the soft copy, and the print material will be available to you, those who are going to be appear for this masters also. So today we are going to discuss, in fact, the debates on Gendered Nation. Why is it that so important to discuss this particular course in the context of the literary perspective? So to begin with that, let me reflect on few questions. How does literature help us to understand the formation of the nation state? Does literature constitute the character of the nation from gender perspectives, or is it peripheral to the politics or the nation state and the gender? So in this regard, let us discuss about this course. As we know that in order to understand the nation and the gender, literature plays a very significant role. And to understand this debate from a different perspective, because when we talk about nation is a category which can be defined in a different discipline and different manner. So this particular course is dealing not only with literature, but it also brings out to you the drama, theatre, films, and also the ways in which from the Western theories to the Indian theory, we evolved as a nation. For instance, that if I ask you this question, how do you visualize nation? It would be very, very categorically, you would see that one would talk about nation, that I want a nation which gives a sort of freedom of expression. And you can sort of relate this debate whether you are neighboring nation state. Like for instance, in some state that, in some of the nations or the nation state, maybe that the ways in which I'm sort of, expressing my views and idea, it is not supposed to be allowed, right? In some nation state, that the debates on territory is not allowed. So how then we should formulate this debate and looked into this debate in theoretical, literary, and in interdisciplinary manner, in political manner also, and the ways in which that the anthropologists, sociologists, and other discipline engage into this. So this particular course, in fact, offers you a multidimensional perspectives or the aspect to understand this category of nation from the gender lens. Because if you historically even looked at the category of nation, because when we look at the Western philosophy, we do read the books about Aristotle, Plato, Rousseau, Hobbes, Locke, and there are a number of the philosophers in the Western philosophy, whether it's a European or the Greek philosophy, we do talk about this category of the nation and the category of the political. And you would see that suddenly that the category of gender is missing out, invisible. I mean, for instance, if we look at, Plato's book, Republic, I mean, it's the ways in which it is engaging us, the name itself. But, where do we place woman? Where do we locate the children? I mean, as Plato says that, they have no role to play, because the whole question of the reason, rationality in the Enlightenment debate, which has been talked about in the Enlightenment period, which is missing out, completely in those texts. So when we look at, in fact, this debate, particularly in this course, the block 1 is dealing with nation and imagination. And from this title itself, nation and its imagination, you would understand what I mean to say. Particularly, how do we reflect, how do we visualize, how do we, foresee, how one would imagine, how that insight to develop a category of nation is required. So in the unit 1, theorizing the nation 1, this unit, which is divided into two parts, one is engaging with the theoretical perspective. Now, for instance, if you look at Geller's work, right? Geller's talked about the modernity is something which has brought the category of the nation. I mean, to some extent, it's true that the modern nation state, because as we sort of engage with the democracy, we see that modern nation state making process occurred, right? There's also been a phase of the Industrial Revolution, the French Revolution, and then the demand of the modern democracy, which we see. So further, if we sort of go and look at Benedict Anderson's work, which is very famous, Imagining the Nation is there, which again talks about the category of nation. Now, there are different parameters which Benedict Anderson also talked about. As we go slowly, we see that the earlier debates which are there, one would see that gender is completely missing out area. Therefore, there are a number of feminists, in fact, eventually engaged in how do we theorize the nation. I mean, drawing from those ideas that many scholars have done, like, for instance, Neera Ewell Davis, and in Indian context, like Anupama Rao's work, which I would, sort of cite you to read and understand from, theorizing the nation perspective. Because today you will see that how it is impacting to us. Yes, there are boundaries. When we talk about nation, the question of territoriality, the boundaries, the citizenship, language, there are a number of discourses which are evolved with this. So therefore, the unit 1 is dealing particularly with theorizing the nation. How do we look into those theories? Now, for instance, Cynthia Clone's work is there, in which she is sort of engaging us to look into differently. Ewell Davis' work is also there. There are a number of feminist scholars who interrogated this debate from the theoretical point of view. And then further, if you sort of get into this debate to look into the unit 2, which is again the title is Theorizing the Nation, unit 2, in which you would engage with what kind of debates were there in Indian context. Like, for instance, if you look at the pre-independence period, we have a good number of literary sources which are available, the archival sources which are available to us, right? In which we can sort of engage with this debate. How do we understand the category of nation and theorize it? Like, there are many thinkers. For instance, you would see that the debate in the 19th and 20th century, in which in Indian context you would see, for instance, Tagore's work, or Gandhi's work, or Vivekananda's work, or for instance the work of the other thinkers like Ambedkar, or in that sense also that the most recent work by a very young scholar which is dealing with also the Lala Rajpat Rai's, again the position on the nation state, at the same time Tilak's point of view on nation, which is sort of engaging us to how the reformist movement or the reformer during that time, at the same time those who were engaging with the with the colonial administrator to deal with in the process of making the nation, that how they visualize it. And we do understand this from their writings, because the archival documents is one of the important document or the evidences which make you understand that how the formation of nation building was going on during that time. And further, you would also see that the literature which is available, the whole genre of the literature, the stories, the plays, as well as the dramas during that time. And through that, one would sort of engage with this debate in order to understand how one should look into, theorizing the nation, right? The unit 3 of this particular block again is dealing with imagining the nation, right? As I already mentioned to you, the couple of very important books, but then if you look at from the Western perspective and the whole history of each of the nation state, for instance, take an example of Europe, how the theory emerged in that context, and you would cite a good number of the authors who have sort of engaged with this debate very thoroughly through literary texts, right? At the same time, when we look at this debate in order to understand Indian context, you would see that the debates not only emerged through the writings through in the local languages, but also that each part of India was evolved in imagining what kind of nation should be there. So if you look at even the debates, the constitution debates, or I would say that even the dramas during that time, to sort of cite one example, I will go back to one of the historical movement which had occurred in late 19th and early 20th century. This debate was very much there. Like for instance, now Satish Chandra has written a wonderful book on Rakhmabai. Most recently it got published last month only. And this particular book is dealing with Rakhmabai's whole history. Now we know that Rakhmabai is the first one who comes from a Sudar community who talked about right to choice, right to have a consent for marriage. She's the one during that time that when her child marriage was happened, she's the one who sort of rejected that. Since she got married to a very elderly man, she doesn't want to stay. Now this, as we know, that this case was debated, but still what I'm saying is that if you look at the whole history through writing this book, which is based on a very rare sources, one would understand what Rakhmabai was visualizing. We also know that she struggled and she became first. She was one of those among contemporary of those first two doctors which had either Kadambani or Anandibai Joshi, and she's the one who was parallelly also studying the medical sciences in London. And as a result, we say that if we look at very few incidences which are there, through that what she was imagining, she was talking about rights of the woman. So in this whole process of imagination the nation, you are going to understand through unit 3, 4, A and 4B, the whole debate how the Indian woman was sort of also engaging not only the Western woman but also the Indian women who were sort of engaging with this debate on imagining nation. One of the pioneering work which I would ask you to read as you go along and read the material, there is a reading list of course given after each chapter, but for instance Pandita Ramabai. Now if we read that the high caste Hindu woman, which was written by Pandita Ramabai at that point of time, and also that the ways in which then she is engaging with the debates on the patriarchy, right? At the same time, she is also thoroughly engaging with the religious debate which had happened during that time. And there are a number of women across India like Pandita Ramabai who was engaging from one place to the other place, because it's a whole vast big the country in which one would sort of engage with this debate very thoroughly. So there are different narratives and different stories, and one has to sort of engage with that as we go along and read the text, right? So in this, particularly in this then debate of imagining the nation, uh, these are, I mean, there are a number of women who, sort of pin down. Even, for instance, the kind of contribution that the YF has done, because how we have, how the society perceived them, but they were also part of that. So, for instance, that if we go along and if we read those texts, like for instance, I would again recommend you to read a fascinating book. It's Women's Writing in India, which got published in 2 volumes by OUP by Suzy Tharo and K. Lalita, in which that there are a number of women who were sort of engaged with this debate through their writings. I mean, it does talk about 600 BC, but there is also a relevant part in which you can sort of pick up certain chapters and engage with those debates in imagining the nation. So, at the same time, for instance, like take an example of Rashid Jan, or take an example Ambai, what she's talking about, or take an example of the woman from the different communities. So what they are arguing there, it's a very clear-cut idea through their literature, through drama, through writings, through different sources. I would say that the main aim was that India should get a freedom, but those voices were always been unheard since it was written from this. Now you would also see that there's also a possibility we must look into this, that today when we talk about LGBTQ question, so how they again pursue these debates, there is a possibility to look into these new areas while reading and studying about this particular course. Now the next book is dealing with interrogating the nation. The very title of this block, which itself is talks about to interrogate, to question the nation. Now, as I said earlier, that nation is the process. It's a continuous process in which we all evolved, right? I mean, every nation, it changes, right? So, in order to understand how one has to go about interrogating the nation, the unit 1 is dealing with race and ethnicity. Now, if we want to really engage with this debate on race and ethnicity, one of the ways in which one can look at from the global perspective, different literatures are available, and for instance, like if I cite the example of Australia, the Aboriginal peoples are there, right? And how the question of race in the context of the Aboriginal and the ethnicity question is addressed in that, right? At the same time, when we look at the question of the race, in Indian context, that there's a clear-cut distinction if we sort of say looked into the region-wise variation. So in certain regions that people do face the problem because of their physical looks and the ways in which that racial features are there. But the literature gives us a sort of explanation which is beyond to that how do we look at this debate in the context of the nation, and that too from the gender perspective. So for instance, that when we look at the work, what Sunita Rani writes in her chapter is that there are multiple problems which are there, but how the nation should sort of try to address these debates in order to understand that there is a category of the gender which has always been missing, and through that one would sort of engage further into this debate of race and ethnicity. Unit 2 in fact deals with gender and class, and the fascinating work which is there to understand is that Premchand's writing, which of course written in Hindi, but and there is a lot of translation of his work. So for instance, that how the class operates in the society in order to understand the gender question and how one can relate with the nation, because there is of course a hierarchy in the society, and the ways in which that Premchand stories talked about it. At the same time, you can pick up, if you are really interested to sort of learn yourself, you can pick up any latest work and relate this debate in order to understand this context of gender and class, which you can sort of reflect and read and think and critically engage further, that how the category of class and gender link with each other, and those hierarchy formed again reformation of this debate is there. At the same time, it reproduces those hierarchy in a typical certain manner. So through that, one would understand at the same time the literature, because again the literary texts which we have, when the writings done by women and the writings done by men, there's a huge difference in those writings. I mean, therefore that we do say that the language plays a very, very important in order to understand the gender debates also. At the same time, the unit 3 is dealing with the question of the caste here, right? In order to understand this debate of the caste, you have to sort of interrogate the existing material as well as the material which was written, say, the early 20th century. Now, for instance, if you take the latest, the work by Bama, right, or Bama Sangini, or for that context, there are many writings, like for instance the writings of Urmila Pawar or Baby Kamble or Kunmod Paude. So these are the works which are talking about how they sort of face the caste discrimination before and after formation of the nation state, Indian nation state. So these narratives in fact informed us that and also that a number of poetry written by different writers on issues related with caste and gender, which talks about not only the hierarchies but those lived experiences, because again that in the feminist methodology we often talk about lived experiences and the ways in which that how those hierarchies are formed. We have to also understand the politics, who writes for whom, right? The person who is from within the community writing for herself or himself, which carries more authenticity, and the people who is outsider writing for them would never understand the impact, the emotional or the psychological impact what one is going through. Because today in the contemporary context, if we look at, it's a number of people, those who are not from particularly say the Dalit community, are working on a Dalit community but trying to project that they are extremely jubilative and but one has to also understand the dynamics of this whole politics when one is looking at the literature debate also from formation of the gender and the nation state. The fourth unit is of course dealing with region and language, because we live in a country which is very diverse, at the same time the country which has a very interesting rich culture. So the region plays a very, very important role, and also the language. In order to understand this debate of region and language, one has to go back to the regional languages, how those regional writers in their different languages are sort of interrogating the question of the gender and the nation in order to understand the authenticity of this debate, gender and nation. So, for instance, we do have writings available, like for instance, to cite one example, Ruxana's Dream, right? I mean, it's a fantastic way where she's, sort of imagining that it's a woman who are, building up new things and producing. So it's a kind of imagination which gives you. At the same time, you come back to the other places like Antarjanam, written by if Kerala, right? Or Kamala Das, for instance, from Kerala. What she is trying to argue, right? In Malayalam and English, in both she wrote. But what is that which she is trying to put forward and interrogate when it was dealing and debating about the nation state, right? At the same time, there is also been the question of the gender and religion. In order to understand this debate, we have to sort of deal with this very categorically, and quickly to link into this, that we do also have the masculinity, femininity, sexualities, female body, nation body, in which you are going to go and read and understand and tease out the different theoretical perspective. And also dealing with the violation, marginalization and militarization, which is in next unit, which is dealing with this debate on that, and also migration, diaspora, alienation, accommodation, displacement and exile. These are the many important and few debates, but there is also been changing scenario to these debates. So in order to understand this particular course, Gendered Nation, you have to thoroughly engage with the readings, and of course that it will open up the new debates, and I'm sure that you will critically think about it as at least a current generation to think through. So thank you so much, and I'm sure that you would enjoy reading and studying this material. You can reach out to me by writing Smita and Patil @ignou.ac.in. Thank you very much.